Hi everybody, my name's Alan Freedman, and I'm joined as usual by my partner in these things, Michael Burd. Hi, Michael.
Good morning, Alan.
And our guest today is Rabbi Daniel Rabin from Caulfiled Shul, which many people will know about. And he took some time out from his rabbinic duties to lead a mission to Israel, which we are going to hear about now. Rabbi Rabin, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Michael, and appreciate being on the Zoom chat, and hope we can share some of the experiences I've just got to witness and see firsthand.
Yes. Okay, so just start by telling us about some of your experiences, some of the highlights, and how did you feel about it all?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I mean, we in December, I spoke to a few people who had just come back from Israel, and every one of them was saying, if you can get to Israel, go to Israel. And so I thought, look, I want to try and get to Israel to show solidarity, to be on the ground, to really just be there with our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land. And so I advertised a small mission, and a small group joined me. We went early February, and we went there for 7 days. So the whole time we were in Israel was about 7 days. And look, I made it a commitment to myself before I left that I wanted to try and listen to as many people as I could, have as many conversations as possible with people who would be willing to share of their stories, to share of their experiences on October 7th and the aftermath of. And firstly, arriving in Israel, usually you get there, and every time I arrive in Israel, it takes an hour or an hour and a half to get out of the airport. You go through security and you get to the passport control, and it's packed. Literally, I was the only person in the international passports. It took me 5 minutes to get out of the airport, and that already was a stark reminder or a stark realization as how damaging this has been for Israel's tourism. And even in the taxi ride, and at first, taking me to Yerushalayim, I asked the taxi driver, how things going, and he said, what every taxi driver that I spoke to, they've really been hit hard. People are not coming, and of course you have people are coming to volunteer and missions that are coming, but in the scheme of how many tourists they would get, usually people are just not showing up yet, and that's understandable. It's still wartime and so on. But the first morning, in fact, we stayed in a hotel in Yerushalayim, and that hotel was the one of the evacuee hotels. So a lot of people from the south and some from the north were staying in that hotel. And again, you hear about, obviously, and I'll talk about this, obviously the deaths and the barbarism that occurred on October 7th, but you don't sort of put in your consciousness what impact that's had on the families who've had to go and stay in hotels and different places. They've been displaced. So the first morning I walk into the dining room, and there's backpacks everywhere and children running around, and the parents having to fill their backpacks and the lunch boxes from the buffet, and they're staying in a little room there was already almost 5 months. And I got to speak to the parents, some of them, and one mother in particular shared that, she's just totally traumatized, her and her children. Although they're now being offered to potentially go back to their home, they can't. And the deep trauma that they've seen, and she was describing what she witnessed on October 7th, it's just, sadly, it's not in the consciousness of the world. And as we know that, the world's only thinking about certain parts of this conflict. They're not seeing the impact that it's having on the Israeli citizens and the Jewish people in Israel.
Mm. Are the kids going to school?
So a lot of them have been absorbed into different schools in the area. In the hotel we were staying, the Joint, we did a partnership with the Caulfiled Shul and the Joint, the JDC, they actually established a kindergarten in the basement of the hotel. So they redesigned it and got sponsorship and donors. So we got to sit in one of the kinder sessions, and the kids were so excited. There was people from Australia. I showed them photos of my children with kangaroos, and they were very excited to see. But it's so sad, that these children are in a hotel the whole time. I know it might sound so nice, they're in a hotel, but it's, as being cooped up, on Shabbat as an example was interesting. You walk in to the lobby, which is usually a tranquil place, and it's like their playground, and it's very sad. Obviously, very uplifting to be there with them.
It's obviously the government must be paying for this. It must be costing a fortune and really hurting the Israeli economy just generally.
Absolutely. I mean, interestingly, so the Kibbutz Sim that were not physically destroyed, or totally decimated. Some of them obviously had terrorists running through them and causing absolute chaos. But some of them, where the houses are okay, they've now been told they can go back to stay in their homes. So it's safe to go back in some of the Kibbutz Sim. But they are given till July when the government will stop paying. So that's where there's this internal conflict where, what do we do? Do we go back to a place which they saw death, they saw their closest friends and families murdered? And so many of them are waiting it out till the funding stops because they just can't bring themselves to going. But yes, it's costing the government an absolute fortune. But thankfully, think about it, the fact that the government is putting in this money, and obviously let's not get to, you may say they're responsible, etc., but at least they're looking after their citizens at this point.
And did you do some touring? Did they take you down south to have a look at what happened? So what was your day? What were your days filled with?
Right. So we try to be quite strategic in doing as much as we could in the short time we were there. So one of the days was very much focused on the hostages and how the negotiations are going, how the families are feeling. So we went to Tel Aviv, where we went to Hostage Square. We went to the hostage headquarters. We got to speak to families of the hostages. One in particular was Rabbi Daron Perez, who's the CEO of Mizrahi Worldwide, and he was unbelievable to hear the internal machinations and challenges that he's facing, both as a parent of a father of as a soldier who was kidnapped on October 7th, and at the same time being somebody who's a deep, strong Zionist and wants what's best for the country, not necessarily what's best for him and his family. So you could see this grappling that these parents are going through, and for him in particular, not knowing the state of his child for 5 months, doesn't know whether he's alive or, God forbid, the other way, if he was injured, where is he? And so that was a big part of the day. We got to speak to, as I said, families of the kidnapped or the captives. We also spent the day, obviously, down south, visiting the places of destruction. We had the opportunity to visit kibbutz near Oz, which, interesting, was a very peace-loving kibbutz. It was interesting to see the change and the switch in attitude. They were telling us, we went house to house. The Bibas family, the famous, the redhead children, that's their kibbutz, and we went to see their house. And it's just, you see the destruction, but you also see, there was a sukkah that was still remaining, that hadn't been touched. And there's children's toys on the floor still from the kids' games, but no one had picked them up, obviously, since the destruction. And the kibbutz near Oz, in fact, they installed a beautiful new kitchen, cost thousands of dollars. You walk in there and it's an inferno, just totally decimated, totally destroyed. But the interesting thing was talking to the person from the kibbutz who was taking us around, and he said, many of the people in that kibbutz would drive daily to the Gaza border, pick up Palestinians and Gazans who, were cancer patients, other patients, and do a service to them, to take them to Israeli hospitals to get treatment. And they were, trying their best to try and help these people, and yet murdered in cold blood.
I think this whole episode has been a wake-up call for the Jewish left, both within Israel and in the diaspora, don't you think?
Oh, so again, as I say, I'm speaking to people from the kibbutz who would be considered on the left of politics, and they have changed their attitude. They're just saying that it's going to be very hard for them to ever try and see a way forward in terms of, reconnecting, if there's ever going to be an opportunity for them to engage again with, their neighbors, so to speak. We also got to see, there's this one, you get to see the cars that were destroyed on October 7th. There's this whole yard of cars that were burnt and also cars that were damaged. And you get to see, hold on, somebody's calling my, excuse me. So you get to see the, bullet holes and wounds. And our guide was telling us that these cars, the Zaka, which is is the organization that deals with obviously looking after the bodies and making sure they're buried properly, and they have now this whole yard of cars where they're not sure what to do with them because there's blood seeped into some of the seats. These are the ones that are not burnt. The ones that are burnt itself are a question. So they're deciding now, the Rabbanut in Israel is deciding whether they need to bury all these cars, because obviously they try and extract parts of bodies or blood, but sometimes it's very hard to get it out. And you just see the destruction, people murdered in literally, point blank, their heads blown off.
it sounds it sounds as if the Kibbutz Sim have been left as they were on October 7. Is that they haven't actually done anything in terms of
So there's
repair?
now talks of starting to rebuild them. I know Kibbutz Be'eri, I was told when I was there, was started. It was soon to happen. Although I've just a friend of mine is now from South Africa, Rabbi's visiting there, and he was in Be'eri, and doesn't look like anything started. So whether there's still discussions or there are plans to rebuild them, maybe it's still too early. I don't know, but there was discussion when I was there about the rebuilding of these Kibbutz Sim. I mean, the other thing, you obviously see the devastation, but you hear so many incredible stories. As an example, we went down south. There was a guy, his name was Moshe, long beard, beautiful guy. He's actually a teacher in schools, but he also runs this pantry packing, so to speak, organization, and they make thousands of meals they've been making since October 7th. But he was telling us that his village, or his moshav, which was down south, it took 2 days for the IDF to get there, and many of the families were in their homes for 2 days, but didn't leave. And when the IDF did get there eventually to try and take them out and rescue them, they marched them all, about a kilometer out of the moshav, where they had the IDF buses waiting to take them to their hotels, wherever they were staying. And at that point, there was a code red, so there was rockets alert. But remember, they're now a kilometer almost away from the moshav, and there's no shelters. So he described the most beautiful scene. And every time I say it, I almost I feel like, crying, because it's just such a beautiful thing. There must have been, he said, about 30 or 40 soldiers and maybe 100 children. And the soldiers told all the children, lie down. And the soldiers formed a blanket. They lay on top of these children for 15 minutes.
Wow.
God forbid if there would have been a shrapnel. And so this protective layer of IDF soldiers over these children. It's just, this is what he's saying. This is who we are as a people. And I was so happy. It was so moving to hear such a story. But you see, we went to Ichilov Hospital as an example, which has a lot of rehabilitation of soldiers there at the moment. Some of them don't want to talk, of course, and you don't want to come in there and they're not monkeys in a zoo. You want to respect their, but a lot of them want to talk. They want to share their story. And one guy in particular was so excited, he brought us into his room, and he had a roommate there, so he was also injured, and it was quite cute. So the one who was telling us the story, his English wasn't so good. So the other soldier who wasn't telling the story, was translating, had a brilliant English. And at the end, after the story, this guy was telling us his story, he got hit by this explosive device. His body couldn't move for days and so on. The other guy said, someone turned to the other guy, and said, what happened to you? He said, my story's not a big deal. I just got blown up as well. And, so this humor and this, but the resilience, because the one guy who was talking to us, I said, are you finished with the IDF? He said, are you kidding me? My people are at risk. My brothers in my unit are at risk. And I said, you literally just got hit by an explosive device. And he said, the minute he's fit, he's going back to serve. So this is the motivation, the love, the unity that you see. And you see it throughout.
Rabbi, I'd like to ask, I'm quite curious. The world response is, as we all know, is shocking. There's almost zero compassion for what happened to Israelis. Are the Israelis down south who are affected, are they aware of all this, what's going on outside of Israel, and the shocking anti-Semitism and the lack of compassion for what happened to them? Are they aware of it, and how are they reacting to that?
So look, they did. Some of them are aware. Some of them they hear murmurings, but of course you can imagine it's not in their headspace really to, I shouldn't say to care, but they've got so much to deal with on the ground. They're the ones who are at the front lines. But as an example, we had a barbecue with an IDF unit, put on a barbecue, because they obviously get fed, but they're getting packaged little meals. So a lot of people going there are trying to host these soldiers for barbecues. We did so with a very elite unit. And just before I answer what they were telling me about your question, this one guy I was talking to, 21-year-old, he was part of the unit that went in to go and liberate the Nova Festival. And, describing to me what he saw coming in there, firstly fighting off the terrorists who were there, but just, he said the destruction of the devastation and the barbarism of what they did to these poor children, these kids just having fun. I don't know how this guy's going to deal with it, to be honest. What he's seen, he's going to need, years of psychological help potentially. But he said he's not even thinking about it now because he's now got a mission. But I asked him, what do you think about the world reaction? And he said, I wish the world could come and understand what we're dealing with. It's very easy for them to speak in their luxury towers in other countries. And he said, he wants nothing more, and he just wishes the world understood. He wants nothing more to just go back to his home in Tel Aviv, go to the beach, hang out with his family. But yet he's having to now go and see this and fight a war that he doesn't want. And it's just so sad for these soldiers. That's why they love at least diaspora jury coming, because they feel like they're not alone. And I cannot tell you how many people, everybody we spoke to and visited, oh, thank you. I'm like, what are you thanking me? You guys are the heroes. You guys are the ones here. No, we're so there's this recognition and this great sense of unity when they see that they're not alone in terms of the Jewish world. But it's very disappointing for them that this is how the world is reacting. And one guy, obviously very clued into politics, he says, I don't understand how they keep asking us for a ceasefire. He's like, it makes absolutely no sense. So they are frustrated. But as I said, I think most of them have just too much to think about other than worrying about what the Australian government or other governments are saying.
Yes. And that story you told about the children, I guess that tells you everything you need to know about the differences between us and them, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, just one other quick. We went to visit Machane Shura. Machane Shura is the army base for the IDF rabbinate, and we got to meet two very, very special human beings. One was named Rabbi Bensi. So it was quite funny because he was a reservist, but he said, like, in his role as an IDF rabbi, he's like, my reserve duty would be once a year I'd get a call, go to this base. They need you coach in the kitchen for Pesach. Okay. He says he gets a call on October 7th, obviously knowing what happened. They said, we need you to come to the base. And he said, we need someone to help run the Chevra Kadisha. And I mean, what this guy has seen, I mean, you cannot even begin to imagine. He was processing all the bodies. Yeah. And he said two very, very special things. He said, number one, they would tie everybody that came in. They didn't know who they were yet. So they would tie a tag around their arm with a number. And at one point, one of the parents of a child who they learned who it was complaining to the rabbi and said, it's almost like the Nazis, you're putting them a number. And he said, no, you're missing the point. The Nazis took the name and replaced it with a number. We've given them a number, but it's only going to end with a name. This is our utmost job. We're going to give every single body that's coming here the dignity of who they are, what they did. And so he said the number's just to help identify and put them in the system. But he said, I promise you, they will not leave here without a name. And they've spent hundreds and hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars to identify. And he was describing what the state that some of them came in. He said they didn't even have enough transport to bring the body. So they were using these trucks which transport chips. And they came in with bodies. I mean, it's shocking. But he said that, the other beautiful thing is that, we consider the people who are killed on October 7th and the soldiers as Kedoshim, as holy people. And so, normally when someone dies, you have to do a Tara. You have to do a cleansing of the body. But if somebody is a Kadosh, somebody died al Kiddush Hashem, they get buried as they are. So these soldiers were getting buried in their blood-stained uniforms, with all sorts of horrible things. But as a testament to Hashem, look, this is who we are. We fight for our own. We fight for our people. We care for every single person. And so that's the idea. But I mean, he just described, again, that's what the world doesn't understand. When people can be so barbaric, like how can you even think and pretend there could be a negotiation? And so to hear from the front line was just very, very, very moving and very sad, to be honest.
Yes, very powerful stories. Rabbi, I know you need to leave. So Rabbi Daniel Rabin, I want to thank you for joining Michael and I for this very brief chat. I'm sure there's a lot more you could talk about. And maybe as time goes on, we'll get to hear about some of those things too.
Yeah, there's so much more. And as you said, in Fifth, I mean, didn't even touch the surface of the other things that are going on. But hopefully this gives you a bit of a picture as to the sentiment on the ground and the deep trauma that Israel has to process and get through.
Yes. If only you could give this discussion on the ABC, perhaps on the Q&A program.
I wish if they invited me, I would gladly go and share this.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Michael, thank you. Rabbi Rabin, thanks for joining us, and we look forward to
Pleasure.
catching up with you in Shul at the earliest opportunity. Bye
Thank
for
you.
now.
Thank you.
Bye bye.